Today's guest is Liz Krauthammer. She's a product management innovation expert in the coatings and building supply space. Liz, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so there's lots in your background I'm interested to asking a question about, but I noticed when you went to Rutgers that you studied Italian studies. So what was there? You lived in Italy, did you?
I did, yeah. So I did my junior year abroad in Italy through the Rutgers Junior Year Abroad program, and that was 6 weeks in a small town called Urbino, and then we moved to Florence, and I was actually matriculated in the University of Florence for a year. So still continues, a couple decades later, continues to be one of the best years of my life.
Oh, wonderful.
Uh,
What were some really fond memories?
Oh my gosh. I mean, just everything, whether there was a group of us, the Rutgers program at the time was about, I think, 35 people. And as we're talking, I'm thinking of all these things now. They're just kind of coming back to me. But there was a core group of about 5 or 6 of us that we would always get together. And they had us living, once we went to Florence, they had us living in apartments. So we were, on our own. And so my apartment, the one that I shared with my roommate, was the closest to we'll call it the inner city. So we would all meet in our apartment and we would have, probably 6 or 7 people all around this table for like four. And we would have what we call these spaghettatas, like these big, just pasta events where we would, we'd cook all from scratch. And then we would go out and we'd go on just on these long walks around Florence, across the Ponte Vecchio. I'm not sure if you've been to Florence, but we just stroll, the evening passeggiata, like the evening walk, a group of us, and it just was incredible. So that, my gosh, I just all of the history. I lived literally 3 blocks on the same road on. It's called the Church of Santa Croce, the Chiesa di Santa Croce, and that's where Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Machiavelli, Galileo, where they're all supposedly buried. I mean, and I would remember walking down this street and walking to that church and just thinking, wow, hundreds and hundreds of centuries have gone by, and all of the people that have walked here where I'm walking now, it was just such a blessing, such a wonderful experience. And then just the general culture and the language, it was outstanding. And then I went back to that same church, went back to Florence. I guess it was 3 years ago on a visit with my father, and now you have to pay to get in. Back then, it was just you just walked in. It was an active church. I mean, it still is active, but now you have to pay to get in, wait in line, and just all of these things. It's a little different now, but different world today. But boy, it was one of the best experiences. I highly recommend anybody that has kids thinking about studying abroad. I would send them abroad for sure.
Wonderful. One of your early experiences, I guess you were working for a company in New Jersey. You were international sales and marketing. How did you get into that?
So my first company was what was called then William Zinsser and Company. And for those in the coatings industry, you'll recognize, the Bullseye 123, BIN, or Cover Stain. Those are the main products, the flagship products. So I got into that because I was actually studying for my PhD in Italian literature at Rutgers at the time, and I did everything except for my dissertation. And but I needed, I'll call it a real job, and I applied for this position for international sales and marketing analyst, and that was with Zinsser, and I got the job. And from there, really, I never went back. I didn't finish my dissertation because I stayed in corporate America, and that's what, that was the beginning of my formal corporate career. And I was doing international sales and marketing for Zinsser, and I eventually got promoted to sales manager, and I was managing sales and distribution and training everything in Latin America and Italy.
Yeah, so you're with this coatings business,
Yeah.
and I mean, did it come naturally to you? Was there a learning curve? Like, what were was your experience like those early years?
Oh my gosh, it was totally not natural for me. When I think back, I had to really, I didn't know what a primer was. I mean, and that was my job, was selling paint primers. No idea what a primer was. I had helped a friend of mine when I was literally in like the fourth grade paint her backyard fence, over the summer. That was a chore her father had given her. So I came over one day. That was my experience painting. And, I did not, in my household, there was, no DIY work ever done, nothing like that. So I didn't have a point of reference. So I had to learn it and I had to study it. I had to learn that and I had to learn sales. So neither, I was not coming from those worlds at all. But I'll tell you, it's actually a great question because that experience of having to learn that from like literally ground zero, that's what really formed me going forward. And I learned very quickly a couple of things. So this was, and I was, in the mid 90s, a woman doing international sales, selling in the coatings industry. There weren't that many women doing that. There were a couple and maybe sundries and here and there, but not a lot. So to be taken seriously, I had to really learn my stuff because I was going down to Latin America and I was doing product presentations and then I would do training to people, to men who had been doing this work for 40 years, and I just knew what they were thinking. Who's this young woman, and I was very young, and who is this young woman coming up here telling me how to do my job and what products to use. But the way I got around that was, I really learned, I became very technical, and that served me over the long term. I learned my products inside and out. And I also brought forward this concept of, okay, we're elevating the coatings. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but we have other options here. And we were bringing innovation down. At the time, products like Bullseye 123, which was the first universal interior exterior water based product in the market. That didn't exist really down there, certainly not that quality. Uh, BIN, shellac based primer, wasn't down there. And the problem solving that these products could offer was incredible. Permawhite, I don't know if you're familiar with Permawhite, mold and mildew proof bathroom paint. At the time, was bathroom paint. Gosh, that did not exist. So I was bringing this new technology, which really gave credibility. We did a lot of testing and sampling, free sampling, and really gave that customer base an opportunity to try it for themselves. But that was the start, and there were challenges along the way with being a young woman coming down and presenting to audiences of all men. But like anything, you work to overcome them, and I think I did. I had no
Yeah.
other choice.
It's amazing what happens when you have no other choice.
Yes, it really is. Yeah.
So I noticed that, from the coding area, you've branched out and done marketing and branding in other areas as well. Including what sort of stands out to me is a toy company. How was that?
So the toy company was I worked for two toy companies. I got into the toy industry. So I was with Sensor for 7 years and doing international sales. And that was, I was ready to move on after a while. And I went into the toy industry. At that point, I wanted to get into what I was calling domestic marketing. And so I first went to, well, I first went into the pet supply. So that was Hart's Mountain. But from there, then I went into Reeves International, and they make collectible toy model horses, and under the Breyer brand, primarily the Breyer brand. So if any women are watching as little girls, you might have had these collectible horses. I certainly did. I was a horse lover as a child, and so that was very fun. That was a lot of fun. It was a very cool team that we were working with, and working a lot with China. So I learned a lot about importing and working sourcing out in China and getting product in and all of that. So from the business side of it, it gave me a great experience. But it was just a lot of fun to work with toys and these horses, and we got to see movie premieres, and So it was that had horses in them, and it was just a great job. From there, then I went to another toy company called Shellcore Toys, which unfortunately is no longer in business. But they focused on preschool toys, and they had their, they were selling to Walmart, and they were doing a lot of private label. But I will be honest, and I've been after that, I came back to the coatings industry. But I have to say, the toy industry as an industry is, at least at the time, was super cutthroat. And I remember thinking, wow, this is-
Give me an example of cutthroat, but what do you mean by that?
I just, it was just really challenging, to get product in. I feel like there was a lot of there duplicate efforts, but if you weren't one of the top brands, you couldn't make headway really. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges that we had. But going to Toy Fair for a couple of years, that was incredible to see. The toy industry's national or international event, and just being surrounded by all these toys, and that was a great experience overall. But again, every all of these positions I would build on them. So I'd take a little bit of each job with me to onto the next.
Absolutely. Now, so you spent a lot of time in the B2B space, but this is more consumer product marketing. What were you able to take in from consumer product marketing into like the B2B world? Because like the toy side is quite on the extreme end of consumer products. Like you said, there's lots of fast moving things, a lot of competition and distribution. What sort of things were you to be able to take maybe from an innovation and marketing perspective into maybe some of these more, let's say, call them a little bit more straightforward B2B's marketing efforts?
So I think, as I was going forward, one of the big realizations I had, for me, was when I went from coatings into pet supply and then into the toy industry. This was a big one for me at the time. Was just, the business model is the same in terms of, because they were all manufacturing companies. So I've always been with manufacturing companies. So the model was the same in that you've got your box stores, whether it's, Home Depot, PetSmart, or Toys R Us at the time, and then you have your independents. So for me, that was just like this huge, when I went first into pet supply, I was like, oh, how do I learn this? And then once I could wrap my mind around it, oh, they've got the independents or the veterinarians, and then you've got your Home Depot's, PetSmart. Then it just all fell into place, and I've kept that with me. It's really about managing your channel, but and also your end user. So that's just, I think, something that became a template going forward for any industry I was in. I kind of create these buckets, who am I talking to? Who am I innovating for? And what are their needs? And how do I get it to market? What's going to be, the path to market from a channel perspective? Am I going to big box? Okay, so I understand then that any big box is going to have, from the costing perspective, is going to have a lot of back end, because that's just how it is. And then they're going to have distribution, warehousing, all of these other, areas I need to consider. And if it's independent, then I know they're concerned about what I'm putting into big box, and then all of their challenges, not having the volume purchases and the volume, pricing breaks that the big. So all of these things, they all came together, and that became one big template that I continue to use this day to whatever I'm doing.
Wonderful. And then you moved to a very large coating or a paint company. And I noticed you said you reinvigorated and managed a concrete coating platform, and you're sort of, I guess you had some new initiatives and stuff like that with new product development and innovation. What were some of those things that were happening there? What were you sort of optimizing or improving?
So that was with Rust-Oleum. And so Rust-Oleum, if I can give a little background here, Rust-Oleum had acquired. So in 2006, I went back to Zinsser. They had just recently been acquired by Rust-Oleum, who was their sister company. So I was still in New Jersey, and then Rust-Oleum asked me out to the corporate office in Illinois in 2010. So when I went out there, then I was working on this on the high performance coatings platform in managing these concrete products, garage floor coatings and basement floor coatings and exterior concrete pavers and driveways and things like that. So that the challenge there was really to kind of get some growth going. It had been stagnant for a little while. And the big push there was for me just to create a new product development roadmap. And so the really great thing about working at Rust-Oleum was they were, and they continue to be so innovation focused. So I learned so much about one, the importance of innovation, and then two, how to execute it. And I'll share a little story. Back in, if you remember the Great Recession, everything is now the Great something or other, but the Great Recession of 2008 and into 2009. So end of 2009, I was still here in New Jersey, and we had I think it was the VP of Sales and Marketing come out, and the Director of Sales come out at the time, and they were talking to us. We were having our own brand planning session, Zinger Brands, and they came out to give us, the talk and everything. We had not yet merged formally with Rust-Oleum. We're still in the process of doing it. And so they came out, and in the midst of, all these, I remember the VPs started talking, said, everybody's going to Home Depot, everybody's going to Lowe's, and all of their customers saying, we're going to take price increases. All the manufacturers, paint manufacturers, were going to their customers saying, due to the economic situation, we need to raise our prices. And he said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be like everybody else. We're going to focus on innovation, and we're going to drive innovation. And that's how we're going to not only help ourselves, but we're going to also help our customers get through this. And so, I was new to innovation at the time, and I remember sitting there thinking, "Are you sure? People are losing their homes. Then you're talking about innovation, and then you start talking about this one product which would eventually launch at a $249 retail for a kitchen update." And I just remember thinking, "Who's going to pay $249 right now?" And sure enough, we launched it. It was successful. And pretty much from that point on, this major retailer would look at us and say, "Oh, hey, it's Rust-Oleum. Come on in." The buyers would say, "Come on in. What innovation do you have to show for us today?" And from then on, it was just like this, there's a lot of innovation, and I learned so much from it. So in that garage floor coating space, we always looked at bringing. That was an exciting time. We looked at different kinds of innovation for garage floor coatings for different looks to kind of grow that space. It was a challenging space because, garage floor coatings required certain prep. You had your DIY customer. That was pretty much a DIY product. Yet you could have, some challenges with DIYers and the prep and things like that. But we really wanted to expand it and come out with different looks. So we worked on that, on a metallic look, which was ultimately it was ultimately stopped literally at the last minute because this is one of these I'm not going to say a failure, but it was one of these innovations that went almost to the point of launch, but then we had to pull back. So we had created this really cool looking metallic garage floor coating, and it went through the entire process. We made it. It was on stability, and literally we had raw materials coming in like the next day, and we were going to make it the day after that. And I get a call from R&D saying their bench sample failed stability, like right then and there. And I was just like, "What?" So we had to take immediate corrective action. But that's the kind of work we're focusing on, and I think it's okay to share that story. But it's one of the realities of innovation. Not everything goes your way, and you have to be prepared to address that. But We would also look at other kinds of innovation for one of the other things we're looking at was a clear sealant for concrete pavers that was also mold and mildew proof. So, for example, when you're protecting your pavers, and certain parts of the country have more moisture than others, and you've got pavers in the shade, and then they get that the mold growing on there, and the different algae, I should say algae. We were looking for a product that would be able to kill that algae before it would, form and grow on there. So all of these different kinds of, products for concrete coatings, this is the kind of work that we were doing. And then when we're looking at that, we didn't want it to be, the challenges of coming up with a product like that. You don't want it to be on the surface because it can be slippery when wet. So creating a penetrating coating that was also, algae resistant. These are some of the I was kind of a paint geek, so I like this conversation. I like these talks. I can get technical, but these are the things that we work on behind the scenes. Trying to come up with great products that solve problems for the homeowners. And then on the other side, then there's work that we would do for the professional side as well. That
Yeah, I mean, in just rough sense, way back, what was kind of the ratio of things that came from outside, like, customers wanting things, and roughly what were kind of dreamed up on the inside? What was that mix?
that's a good question. There were a lot of there were a lot of buyers saying, "Wouldn't it be nice to see this?" And you have to act on that. Then there were other products that would come forward that we would sit in our innovation brainstorming sessions and say, okay, how can we solve problems for the pro, for example? So I would probably say the pro products were more of us thinking really truly problem solving, and the DIY products,
Hmm.
a lot of them came from the big box buyers, saying, I'm being asked for this, or from wherever their intelligence came, they would ask us for something, and sometimes those products were successful, sometimes they weren't. But when a buyer asks you for something, you pretty much say yes, we'll do it, and you try to, and then you figure out. You don't try. You figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, yeah, that's the part. You make it happen somehow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to. Yeah.
So no, that's great. I mean, any other things? I mean, we talked about innovation. What is the key steps within the innovation? Like you talked about the innovation pipeline or new product development and phases and stuff like that. What's the key? Like, where do people get it wrong? Like when people come to you saying, "Hey, I want to be more innovative," where do you start?
So for me, my process is it's linear to a large degree. So I think mine starts with innovation. Well, I think there's two starting points. One is, are you ideating for innovation, or are you ideating just as a brand extension? So brand extensions are easier. Do you need another color? Do you need to modify something in it? So that kind of, that's an easier path. You look at what you have, and you look at any gaps, anything that competition has that you don't have, that you need to have to fill out a program. I think that's a little easier and more direct. When you're looking for ideation and creating innovation and creating that pipeline, that's where I find that's the more exciting of the two, and that, I think, begins with the brainstorming session. So again, when I was at Rust-Oleum, they brought in Mike Mitchell, who he's a guru for innovation and ideation, and so much more. But he came in and he gave us innovation training, brainstorming and ideation training sessions. And so I learned a lot from him. But one of the things that I carry with me all the time now is that concept of brainstorming and bringing in diverse thinkers to that brainstorming session. So for me, it starts with the brainstorming. And if I'll just go back to the a Rust-Oleum example. So if I were brainstorming for a new product, we talked about DIY. So let's talk about brainstorming for a professional end user product. You know, I'd want to have a couple different people from the company. I'd probably want to have somebody from sales. I'd want to have somebody from manufacturing, somebody from R&D, and then I'd also want to have somebody that has nothing to do with those, but has DIY experience. Again, just internal, but still some experience. And then I'd want to bring in a contractor or two, somebody who's trusted. And, they sign a confidentiality agreement, because otherwise, if we're just brainstorming in a bubble, you don't want to find out after you've gone through all these measures that have a contractor or two say, well, that's real nice, but we can't use it because of X. So then, we, for me, innovating for a professional end user, I think a lot of times is about problem solving. It's about how can we give them a relevant product that they need, but how can we help them also do their job more effectively and more quickly? So what we want to avoid are callbacks, right? Anybody in the trade knows you don't want to do a callback. It's expensive. It's damaging to your reputation. So we want to give them a great product that is easy to use. It solves a problem of some kind, and they can use it and quickly. So in my case, I was typically working with primers. So, a fast dry primer, that's one of the characteristics that any product I was working on would have to have, right? Because we want to get them in and out. We have the primer dry quickly so the top coat they can apply it and then move on to the next job. So I would look at different, bring in different ideas at times so for concrete coating, we looked at acid staining at one point. Acid staining, you really need to know what you're doing to do it. And then there's all these different issues. We ended up not going forward with it, but the process is interesting. I remember going to the World of Concrete one year and sitting in on a couple of these seminars where you had these guys that are doing acid staining, and they're just making these really beautiful designs in concrete floors. I don't know if you've been to any of these seminars, but they're really amazing. And so taking that, all of that information, and then it's almost like this funnel, right? You've taken all of this different inspiration from the parallel industries, if you will, and then bring it down and then see how you can, I shouldn't say this out loud, but I always kind of dumb it down, right? So bring it down to, if I can't be up here because that's not who my end user is, and that's not my price point or my installation, what can we take from that and then make it work for my end user, right? And make it
Simplicity,
within
right?
my price point. Yeah, yeah,
Simplicity.
yeah. So there's a lot of different ways, but it starts with that brainstorming, and brainstorming process being what it is, and you take your key ideas, you bring them back to the leadership team or whoever needs to make that give that approval. Excuse me, and then you socialize it. You make sure that sales wants it. Number one, you got to make sure that sales wants it, because if sales doesn't want the product, then why make it? They're not going to sell it. So sales is my first customer all the time, internal sales. Excuse me. So once you've socialized it and you've got everybody on board, then you put it through your regular stage gate process or whatever you're working with. But I think it's really important that you're kind of doing the check and balances, checking all the details early on, your price point, making sure that your business case is solid before you get too far down the road, and making sure that your business case is aligned with corporate objectives. Because if you're going off over here, but the company is over here, then there's a major disconnect, and that's just been a waste of time and money and resources for the company, and it's just not good for anybody. So I think a lot of the success of any new product development or going through the process is going to be, is it aligned with what the greater organization wants to do? Is it supporting profitability? Is it supporting those margins where we need to be at? And then, that what's the stretch? Can you hit that stretch profitability goal as well? If you can hit all that comfortably, then you can go forward, and then come out and be successful. And that's kind of in a nutshell, But I think that's kind of the meat of the product development process. Then you have all of your inner, your inner the development conversations and the development work with your cross-functional teams. Great communication, it has to be there. Um, because if you're not communicating and everybody doesn't understand what the needs are, R&D needs to know exactly what that product needs to look like, or the engineering team, depending on what kind of company, what kind of product you're making. The people making the nuts and bolts of it, they really need product management to say, create this spec sheet and say, this is exactly what I need. These are all the features, and this is what I need it to do and why. This is what it cannot be. This is the price point, and give a range of pricing of where I'm going to price it and where you need to be cost wise. And I found that the best R&D partnerships are with those chemists or the engineers, again, depending where you are, that understand that relationship. Because I've seen some really great chemists that come up with these really great products, but they're like $3, $4 over, any kind of acceptable cost. And so, you see them get disappointed when when you have to reject it, when you have to say, it's great product, but can you take, $3 out of it? and,
You don't need
and
this
that's
chemical.
exactly. Yeah. It doesn't need to do all of that, but you don't want to squash that inspiration and that devotion that they have to innovation either. I think the best relationships are when both sides understand what the other side needs. And then you're working together and you save a lot of time, and it's just a lot more effective.
Yeah. So basically, if you are a person that's stick handling this process, you need to know a little bit about the total process. And then you have to work hard to communicate to create alignment so that it matches up on many different sort of verticals and horizontals to make sure
Yeah.
that goals are being met.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need to know as product manager, it's my belief that you are the center of that product's universe. You are that center spoke, the hub and the wheel, I should say. And so everybody needs to be able to come back to you, and you need to be able to understand what everybody's going to come back to you about. What questions do they have? What are their needs from you, from perspective of information? You need to be able to provide all of that willingly and not at the last minute, and then just be there to help everybody through that process. But that means that you need to really understand your product and your industry, and really know what makes sense to put out there. So um, you know it's a challenging role, and sometimes it can be frustrating because anything could go wrong, and it's always coming back to product management, to solve the problem, even if if it's out of our control or something that's not even our area. It's going to come back to product. And so we just have to have a tough skin and get that. But at the same time, it's exciting that you're the center of this products universe, and people are coming to you for your recommendation and advice on how to manage problems.
Yeah, for sure. So you have a lot of experience. You've learned a ton. If you were to go back to the early part of your career and provide advice to your younger self, what would that advice be?
I think part of it would be, um, don't be so serious in the beginning. I was so focused, like I started talking about before, being a young woman in this industry in the '90s. It wasn't easy. That's a whole other conversation. But there were challenges that I had to overcome, and overcome them professionally, both within the company and outside of addressing things that were that came my way. So I had a really thick skin, and I think I'd go back and say, look, you can be professional, and know your stuff, and all of that, but also have a little more fun with it. So I think I'd say that, and I'd say also speak up more. And somebody gave me advice once many years ago. Just keep your head down, do your job, and that was good advice, but I think I took that maybe a little too seriously, and so I should have probably lifted up my head a little bit more, and maybe maybe again had a little more fun and socialized a little bit more. I was all about the work, and as you get older, you realize you need more balance, even in the workplace. You need that balance, so it's okay to laugh and have fun and joke around.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful advice, and I appreciate you sharing what you know.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.